The day I needed urgent medical help, my mother's husband called me a burden and said I should solve my own problems. She stayed silent as he pushed me out the door. Years later, they came knocking, and I made sure they faced the consequences. My name is Aaron, and the day everything changed started with a tight chest, blurred vision, and a dull fear that something inside my body was slipping out of control. I had been dealing with sharp pains for a few days, but kept pushing through them because that was the routine in that house. Everyone kept quiet, handled their own issues, and acted like asking for help meant weakness. When the pain grew too strong to hide, there was no choice left but to speak up. My mother's husband, Mark, sat in the living room with the TV on. He barely turned his head when I told him I needed to get to a hospital. Sweat was running down my neck, and my hands shook from the strain of trying to stand straight. He didn't care. He never did. He had taken on the role of a parent only when it gave him something to brag about, not when it required effort. My mother stood near the kitchen counter. She had a way of shrinking into corners whenever conflict rose. Years of living with him had worn her down. She tried to keep the peace in the house by choosing silence over confrontation. That silence became normal for her. It became expected. It also became the thing that broke whatever trust remained between us. When I told him the pain was getting worse, Mark barely lifted his eyes. He mumbled that he was tired of dealing with problems that weren't his. He had money for beer, money for pointless projects he never finished, and excuses for every situation that required him to step up. Helping me wasn't on his list of concerns. When he stood up and came toward me, I thought he might at least try to understand the state I was in. Instead, he pulled the door open, told me to step outside if I needed anything so badly, and walked back in. The door closed with enough force to make the porch shake. A lock clicked. That small sound felt heavier than anything else happening in my body at that moment. The porch boards were cold under my hands as I leaned on them to stay upright. A part of me waited for my mother to come out. She had done that a few times in the past, always checking after situations where he went too far. She didn't open the door this time. Her silence lingered behind that locked entrance. It felt like she had chosen a side without saying a single word. A long minute passed before I reached for my phone. The screen kept going out of focus, but I managed to scroll through contacts until I found someone who wouldn't ask questions. My friend James answered on the second ring. He picked me up without hesitation. No speeches, no judgment, no blame. Just headlights pulling up and a car door opening. The hospital confirmed what I already suspected. The pain wasn't harmless. It needed treatment, rest, follow-ups, and medication I didn't have the money for. Lying there with machines beeping around me, I replayed the moment on the porch in my mind. Not because I wanted to hold on to it, but because something inside needed to recognize it for what it was, a point that couldn't be undone. There had been other moments before that day. Small things that I brushed off because I thought families were supposed to bend without breaking. Times when Mark talked down to me, mocked things I cared about, or treated my space like it didn't belong to me. Times when my mother looked away instead of standing up for me. I had been telling myself those things weren't enough to leave. I had convinced myself that things might change if I stayed calm and patient. That day stripped away the last excuse. Standing on that porch while struggling to stay conscious wasn't something I could explain away or tolerate again. The moment he locked that door, whatever connection I had to that house disappeared. The hospital released me with prescriptions and warnings about pushing myself too hard. James drove me to his place for the night because going back wasn't an option. The idea of stepping into that house again made something tighten in my chest worse than the medical issue. The next morning, I gathered the few things I'd left there. I went in while Mark wasn't home, because even hearing his voice would have made me walk out without anything. My mother stood in the hallway and asked if I was leaving for a while. She didn't ask what happened. She didn't mention the night before. She didn't offer an apology. Her voice carried the same shaky tone she used whenever she tried to pretend things were normal. A single sentence formed in my mind, clear and steady. There was nothing left for me in that house. I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I packed everything into 2 bags, walked out, and didn't look back. My mother watched from the doorway. Her face didn't change. She stayed still, choosing the same silence she had chosen the night before. Once the bags were in the car, a strange calm settled in. Not relief, not freedom, just space. Space where there used to be noise, tension, and a constant sense of being pushed aside. Space where I could start rebuilding without waiting for anyone in that house to treat me better. I stayed on friends' couches for a while, working small jobs and trying to get on my feet. Every time I started to think about that night, the image that returned wasn't the pain or the porch or the locked door. It was the stillness on my mother's face as she let it happen. That expression stayed with me longer than the physical recovery. Cutting contact wasn't an announcement. It wasn't some dramatic moment. It happened naturally, the way a broken object simply doesn't work anymore. I stopped calling. I stopped answering. I stopped hoping for change from people who had made it clear what they were willing to do when things got hard. That day set the entire future in motion. It shaped the path that came after, the choices I made, the way I built myself back up. Every step away from that house felt like a step toward a life that wasn't controlled by someone else's anger or excuses. Everything that happened later, every success, every boundary I built, every distance I maintained, started with that locked door and the silence behind it. Leaving that house pushed me into a life where every choice depended on effort, not expectation. The first weeks were rough because nothing felt steady. I stayed with friends who let me sleep on couches or spare mattresses. I moved my bags around so often that it felt like I was carrying my whole world in the back seat of whatever car I could borrow for the day. But that unstable stretch gave me something I had never had in that house: control. I took the first job I could get. It wasn't anything special, just stocking shelves at a small store during the morning shift. The pay wasn't much, but it helped me start covering the medical debt from that hospital visit. I picked up a second job a few weeks later, cleaning offices in the evenings. Both jobs were tiring, but working that hard never bothered me. The work didn't insult me or push me aside. It didn't lock me out when I needed support. It didn't tell me I was a burden. It just paid what it promised, and I liked that. Managing two jobs and recovery at the same time became the routine that shaped everything that followed. My health got better, but the fear of ending up in that desperate state again kept me careful. I followed every instruction from the doctor. I didn't miss appointments. I avoided shortcuts. There was no safety net left for me, so I built one for myself. The first real step forward came when I saved enough to rent a small apartment. It wasn't much. The walls had marks from previous tenants. The kitchen cabinets were old, and the floor creaked in certain spots. None of that mattered. It was the first place in years where I felt safe sleeping through the night. It was mine. No one yelled through the walls. No one followed me around the house, criticizing anything they could find. No one tried to control how I lived. The silence was different from the silence my mother used to hide behind. This silence meant peace. During those early months, my mother tried calling a few times. I let every call go to voicemail. Nothing she said would have erased the choice she made when she let him push me out. She didn't apologize. She didn't ask if I recovered. All she left were short messages asking why I was acting distant. Hearing her voice just made it clear how little she understood about the damage done. If she wanted to fix anything, she would have faced what happened instead of pretending everything could return to normal without effort. Work became the center of my life. I didn't socialize much. I didn't date. I didn't waste time on anything that didn't help me move forward. I focused on paying the medical bills first. Each payment felt like I was peeling away the last reminders of that night. When the final bill cleared, I stared at the receipt for a long time, not in celebration, but in recognition that a weight had finally been lifted. With the debt gone, I looked for better opportunities. I applied for jobs I didn't think I had enough experience for, but I still tried because there was nothing left to lose. One company gave me a chance. It wasn't a high-level job, but it came with stability, benefits, and people who treated me with basic respect. That alone felt like a step up from the life I had come from. I learned quickly and kept my head down. The more responsibilities they gave me, the more I made sure not to waste the opportunity. I didn't brag about anything. I didn't talk about where I came from. I didn't mention the night on the porch or the months that followed. Keeping my past out of the workplace gave me room to focus. My managers noticed that I stayed consistent and didn't complain. Over time, that turned into trust. I was offered a better position after 2 years. It came with more pay and more hours, but I didn't mind. I liked the routine of working towards something that had nothing to do with fear. The raise let me move out of the small apartment and into a better place. It wasn't fancy, but it was clean, quiet, and safe. It felt earned. Every bill I paid on time, every upgrade I afforded, and every improvement I made to that new place reminded me that none of it came from anyone who once tried to make me feel worthless. Whenever my mother tried reaching out, I still ignored the calls. I knew she wanted me to pretend the past was smaller than it was. I knew she didn't want to deal with the truth that her silence caused damage she couldn't undo. She had lived so long in a house where avoiding conflict felt easier than protecting her own child. Her calls weren't about fixing anything. They were about easing her guilt. The longer I stayed away from them, the more grounded I felt. My life wasn't perfect, but it was mine, and that was enough. No one had the power to push me out of my own space. No one had the power to shut a door in my face and tell me to deal with things alone. I didn't owe anyone explanations or apologies for choosing distance. I built my life on quiet progress. I didn't seek praise, and I didn't want sympathy. I just wanted stability. Over time, I reached a point where I wasn't just surviving. I was secure. I could cover emergencies, pay for repairs, handle debt, and plan for the future without fear. Years passed, and the distance between me and my mother's house grew until it felt like a different life. I didn't expect to hear from them again. I thought silence would be permanent. But silence never stays empty for long. One afternoon, everything I had built was tested when the past showed up at my doorstep without warning, standing on the welcome mat of the life I made without them. The afternoon they showed up, I had just come home from work. The day had been long, but steady. The kind of day where nothing went wrong and nothing stood out. I parked, grabbed the mail, and headed toward the door without expecting anything unusual. When I looked up and saw them standing there, it felt like the air around me tightened. My mother stood closest to the door. She looked older than I remembered. Her hair had more gray in it, and her shoulders seemed tense, like she had been carrying something heavy for a long time. Behind her stood Mark, arms crossed, posture stiff. He looked the same as always, stern, annoyed, acting like he owned every space he stepped into. Seeing him on my doorstep brought back the memory of him locking me out when I needed help, and that memory set the tone for everything that followed. Neither of them had called ahead. They didn't send a message, didn't ask if they could visit, didn't even pretend to care whether the timing worked for me. They just showed up. That alone told me everything I needed to know about how this conversation would go. My mother tried to speak first. Her voice wavered in a way that didn't sound rehearsed. It sounded like she had played out this moment in her head and was now unsure how to say any of it. She didn't ask how I was doing or how life had been. She didn't acknowledge the years of silence or the night she let me stand outside while I was struggling to breathe. She went straight to the reason they came. They said they needed help. Mark had lost his job months before. They were behind on bills. Their savings were gone. They were trying to keep the house from falling apart, but everything was slipping fast. He didn't talk like someone asking for support. He talked like someone giving instructions. He said I should step in because they raised me. The way he said it made it clear he thought I owed them something. That word, owed, made my stomach twist. My mother didn't correct him. She just stood there staring at me like she expected me to step forward and agree without hesitation. Her expression wasn't angry, but it wasn't warm either. It was the same expression she wore in the past whenever she hoped things would fix themselves without her doing anything. Mark went on about how the family should help each other. He said I had a good job now and could spare a little. His voice had an edge to it, like he was scolding me for not already offering money. The confidence in his tone didn't match the situation he described. It was the same confidence he used years ago when he pushed me out and told me to fix my own issues. That memory sat right behind every word he spoke. The longer he talked, the more everything from the past pressed against my mind. The locked door, the cold porch, my mother watching without stopping him, the drive to the hospital, the months of recovery, the 2 jobs, the medical bills, all the times I needed help and got nothing. He had the nerve to say I should help because of everything they had done for me. I stood there listening, letting him stack his arguments higher and higher, because each sentence revealed exactly how he still saw me. Not as a person with a life I built on my own, not as someone who had been pushed aside when vulnerable, just as someone he thought he still had control over. My mother finally spoke when he paused. She didn't apologize. She didn't acknowledge the past. She just said they were in a difficult situation and needed support. Her voice carried a shaky mix of stress and hope, like she was waiting for me to solve something she didn't want to face herself. Standing in front of them, I felt something shift. I had worked too hard to rebuild my life. I had earned stability without anyone's help. I had gone through years of distance and silence because it was the only way to stay sane. And now they were acting like all of that disappeared because they needed money. Both of them waited for me to say something. Mark had that look he used to wear back when he thought intimidation worked on me. My mother looked like she was bracing for disappointment, but not because of the past, because she wanted an answer that made things easy for her now. I didn't respond right away. I looked at them and let the weight of the moment settle. I wanted to see if either of them would acknowledge what they had done, if either of them would bring it up, if either of them would show any sign that they remembered the last real interaction we had. They didn't. They stood there acting like this was a normal visit, like nothing significant had happened between us. Their silence about the past said more than any apology could have. They came to me only because they were desperate, not because they cared, not because they wanted to make things right, only because they needed something. That realization left no confusion. They hadn't returned because they wanted a relationship. They hadn't returned because they missed me. They hadn't returned because they felt remorse. They returned because they ran out of options. Standing there, I knew exactly where this conversation would lead next. They expected help. They expected me to ignore the past. They expected me to treat them better than they treated me. But the last time I needed help, they left me on a porch struggling to stand. And that memory wasn't going anywhere. They kept standing there waiting for an answer, but I wasn't rushing to give one. I wanted to hear the truth from them before I said anything. Not excuses, not half-statements, just the truth. When neither of them said a word about the past, it confirmed what I already knew. They weren't here to fix anything, only to take. I stepped outside so the conversation wouldn't happen in my doorway. I didn't want them crossing into the space I had built without them. Mark tried to start again with the same tone he always used, the one meant to push people into doing what he wanted. He said they didn't have time for delays, that the bills were stacking up, that I should be mature about it. Hearing that from the same man who threw me out while I needed emergency care made something inside me go sharp and focused. I told him I remembered everything from that night. I said it clearly, without raising my voice, without dragging the story out. I repeated his exact words from the porch. The moment I said them, he froze. He didn't deny them. He didn't question whether he had said them. He only tried to act like they didn't matter anymore. He said he was having a rough day. He said he didn't mean it like that. He said it was a long time ago. Each sentence sounded like he was trying to convince himself more than me. My mother stepped in and asked me not to bring up the past. She said it gently, the way she always spoke when she didn't want conflict. She said everyone said hurtful things sometimes. She acted like the entire moment on that porch had been a simple argument, not a situation where her son had been pushed out of the house while needing help. I told her I remembered her silence more than his words. That silence had stayed with me through every shift I worked to pay off hospital bills. It stayed with me when I moved from place to place until I found stability. It stayed with me while I built a life without her or him. I told her that silence mattered because it showed exactly where she stood. Mark started to get irritated. His face tightened the way it used to when he was about to say something cruel. Instead of apologizing, he said I was being dramatic. He said everyone had bad moments. He said I shouldn't hold grudges when family needed help. I told him this wasn't about grudges. It was about choices. He made a choice that night. She made one too. I made mine afterward. My mother tried again, asking me to look past everything. She said they were struggling and didn't know who else to turn to. She said I should understand how life can hit hard sometimes. She still wasn't addressing anything real. She wasn't talking about responsibility. She wasn't talking about the damage done. She was only talking about the situation she wanted me to solve for her. I made it clear that I wasn't responsible for cleaning up problems caused by their decisions. I said it in a steady voice, not angry, not emotional, just direct. They expected me to soften once they showed up in person. They expected guilt to pull me in. They expected the same compliance I used to give when I was younger and didn't have a choice. They weren't expecting a boundary that wouldn't move. Mark said again that I owed them because they raised me. He said it like it was a fact, like it could erase everything that followed. Hearing him talk about raising me made the memory of that night feel sharp again. He didn't raise me. He lived in the same house, controlled everything he could, and acted like basic shelter was something I should pay back. I told him I didn't owe either of them anything. Not money, not time, not support. I told him the only thing I owed myself was distance, and I had kept that promise for years. My mother's eyes filled with tears. It wasn't the first time she reacted like that when someone pushed back against him. She cried when she wanted situations to go quiet. She cried when she wanted the other person to feel guilty enough to drop the subject. Tears had always been her shield, not for protection, but for escape. She said she didn't know what to do that night years ago. She said things happened fast. She said she didn't want anyone fighting. I told her she didn't have to fight. She only had to open the door. That single truth hung in the air between us. She didn't respond because there was no excuse that could cover what she didn't do. Every attempt to justify it fell apart right there. They asked again, trying a softer approach this time. My mother said they would lose the house if they didn't get help soon. Mark said they'd figure things out together if I stepped in. The shift in tone didn't change anything. The goal was the same. I stayed firm. I told them no. No hesitation. No apology. No explanation beyond what was already clear. My refusal didn't come from anger. It came from reality. The same reality they had created the night they locked me out. The same reality they ignored for years while expecting me to forget it. For the first time in the entire conversation, they realized they weren't going to get what they came for. The confidence Mark walked in with started to fade. My mother looked down at the ground, like she was searching for words she never learned how to use. The confrontation didn't end in shouting. It didn't need to. It ended in a clear boundary they couldn't push past. I wasn't going to relive old patterns. I wasn't going to carry their problems. I wasn't going to let them rewrite history so they could feel better about their choices. They wanted help. They expected compliance. They got neither. And standing there facing both of them, I didn't feel guilt. I didn't feel doubt. I felt something solid, something earned through years of rebuilding on my own. For the first time, the power in the situation wasn't in their hands. It was in mine. The moment they realized I wasn't changing my answer, everything in their faces shifted. Mark's calm act vanished first. His jaw tightened the way it used to when he was about to lash out, but he held himself back because this wasn't his house, and he knew he had no ground to stand on. His voice rose anyway, not to yell, but to shove blame in my direction. He said I was being selfish. He said family steps up no matter what. Hearing that from him felt almost unreal. This was the same man who turned his back when I needed help just to stay conscious. The same man who locked the door without a moment of hesitation. I reminded him of that. I said it plainly, without emotional force behind it. Just facts. He didn't look at me after that. He looked past me, like he was trying to find a version of the story that made him the victim instead of the one who caused the damage. When he spoke again, his voice had that sharp edge he used when arguments in that house used to escalate. He said I was twisting things. He said I was letting old moments ruin the present. I told him the moment he was talking about wasn't small. It wasn't something people forget. It was the point where everything between us crossed a line that couldn't be taken back. I told him it wasn't old to me. It shaped years of my life, years he never saw because he never cared enough to ask. My mother stepped in when she realized he wasn't helping their case. She had tears in her eyes again. Her voice shook, but this time not because of fear of conflict. This time because she could feel the outcome slipping away. She said she didn't know what to do back then. She said she felt stuck between keeping peace and standing up for me. She said she didn't want anyone in the house to explode, so she stayed quiet. All those sentences told me one thing. She understood the situation back then, but she chose silence anyway. I told her she didn't need to argue with him that night. She didn't need to fight. All she had to do was open the door. She didn't. That was the moment she lost the right to expect anything from me. Her tears came harder when I said that. She reached for the same old line she had used my whole childhood, that she tried her best. I didn't respond to it because her version of best always meant avoiding conflict, no matter what it cost someone else. Once she saw crying wasn't changing my stance, she tried something softer. She asked if I could help just this once. She said they would figure out the rest. She said losing the house would ruin them. She tried to paint it as a temporary crisis, not years of poor choices catching up. I stayed steady. I told her again that I wasn't stepping in. I wasn't going to fix damage they created. I wasn't going to carry the responsibility they walked away from when I needed them. That was when the threat came. Mark stepped forward and said if I wouldn't help, then they would tell the rest of the family that I abandoned them. No hesitation, no shame, just a threat to smear my name because I wouldn't hand them money. He said relatives would see who the real problem is. He said they would tell everyone I turned my back on them after everything they did for me. My mother didn't stop him. She didn't correct him. She didn't ask him not to say it. She let him speak for both of them. I told them they could say whatever they wanted. I was done hiding the truth to protect them. I said if they wanted to involve the family, I would explain everything exactly as it happened. Not exaggerated, not softened, just the facts. He didn't expect that answer. He expected fear, guilt, or hesitation. Instead, he got a direct challenge he didn't know how to handle. He stared at me for a long second, trying to come up with something else to say, but nothing came. My mother stepped in again, but her tone had shifted. The shaky guilt was gone. Now she sounded frustrated. She said I was making things harder than they needed to be. She said they didn't come to dig up the past. They came for help. That sentence alone explained everything. She still thought the past didn't matter as long as the present demanded something from me. I told her the past mattered because it showed me who they were when I needed them most. I wasn't ignoring some small mistake. I was recognizing a pattern they never broke. They realized I wasn't changing my decision. My mother kept wiping her eyes, but she didn't offer an apology. Not one. Not even a shallow one. She just looked at me like I was failing her by not cleaning up her life. Mark muttered something under his breath about ungrateful kids, then turned toward the car. My mother stood there a little longer, hoping I would soften. I didn't. She finally walked away without saying goodbye. She didn't look back. I watched them get in the car and drive off. There was no dramatic moment, no shouting, no slammed doors, just a quiet end to a conversation they expected to control but didn't. I stood there for a minute after they left, not to reflect, but to let the air settle. The boundary had been clear. They knew it now. Whether they accepted it or not didn't matter. They weren't going to tell the family the real story. But I knew they were going to tell a story. And I knew exactly what I needed to do when that happened. I walked out of the house and sat in my car for a minute, trying to steady my breathing. My hands were still shaking, not from fear, but from the pressure that had been building since the first moment I got dragged into all of this. My name, my choices, my patience. Every piece of me had been pulled and twisted by everyone else's expectations. And this was the first time I finally pushed back. When I drove home, the road felt longer than usual. I replayed every word in my head, wondering if I could have said something differently, but the truth was simple. I didn't regret any of it. I said exactly what needed to be said. I was tired of holding everything together while everyone else pretended they weren't the ones breaking it. When I got home, I sat on the couch and let the silence fill the room. No one yelling, no one pulling me aside, no one trying to guilt-trip me into fixing problems I didn't create. Just quiet. And in that quiet, it hit me I wasn't going back into that same cycle again. Not after today. The next morning, I woke up clear-headed. I sent a single message to everyone involved. Nothing long, nothing dramatic. Just a boundary I should have set years ago. I'm done being the person you offload everything onto. If anyone wants to talk to me, talk respectfully. If not, don't talk to me at all. No one replied at first. And honestly, that silence felt better than any apology could. For once, I wasn't waiting around for someone else to decide how I should feel. Later that evening, my sister called. Not to fight, not to guilt-trip me. She actually apologized. She said she didn't realize how much she'd dumped on me until I stopped letting it slide. She wanted to fix things, and for the first time, it sounded sincere. We talked, but I made it clear that rebuilding meant everyone had to change their behavior, not just me. She agreed. I didn't expect everything to magically shift overnight, But ending that night, for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was finally living my own life instead of playing the role everyone else wrote for me. And that was enough. If you enjoyed this video, please hit that subscribe button. It really helps the channel and lets us bring you more and better stories.